Welcome, restless wanderer, to the deceptively cheerful world of Elmore, where behind every rainbow and smile lies a shadow deeper than the night itself. Tonight, we'll explore the hidden darkness that lurks beneath the amazing world of Gumball's colorful surface theories that suggest this isn't just a cartoon town, but something far more sinister. So settle into your bed, let your mind drift like morning mist across suburban streets, and prepare to discover why nothing in Elmore is quite what it seems. Close your eyes when you're ready, and let's begin our journey into the unsettling truth. In the quiet moments between laughter and sleep, when the bright colors of childhood fade into the gentle darkness of contemplation, there exists a theory so unsettling, yet so perfectly logical, that it transforms everything we thought we knew about the world of Elmore. What if the rainbow-hued streets and impossible physics of Gumball's universe aren't simply the whimsical products of animation magic, but something far more calculated and cold? What if every inconsistency, every reality-bending moment, every impossible coexistence of different art styles and creatures represents not creative freedom but digital imprisonment? The simulation theory suggests that Elmore exists not as a real place where cartoon families live their lives, but as an elaborate digital construct of virtual reality so sophisticated that its inhabitants have no idea they're trapped within lines of code and rendering engines. It's a theory that explains the unexplainable, while casting every moment of joy and discovery in the harsh light of artificial creation, where free will becomes programming, and love becomes carefully calculated emotional algorithms. Consider for a moment the impossible diversity of Elmore's population, where a blue cat can attend school alongside a piece of toast, a balloon, a ghost, and a rainbow-colored teddy bear. In any real world, such biological impossibilities would represent either divine intervention or complete chaos. Yet in Elmore they coexist with the casual normalcy of a Tuesday morning. But what if this diversity isn't magical at all? What if each character represents a different subroutine, a unique piece of software designed to test specific behavioral parameters within the larger simulation? Gumball himself, with his blue fur and pink nose, exists in a traditional cartoon art style that speaks of hand-drawn animation and classic techniques. His appearance suggests a certain baseline reality within the digital framework. Perhaps he represents the original template, the first successful iteration of consciousness within the system. Darwin evolved from simple goldfish to anthropomorphic companion, demonstrates the simulation's capacity for dramatic transformation and adaptation. His transition from pet to brother, representing not biological impossibility, but software evolution in real time. Yet it's the supporting cast that truly reveals the simulation's nature, each character rendered in a completely different artistic style that should clash and jar, but instead creates a harmony that speaks of sophisticated programming designed to make the impossible seem natural. Penny exists as a three-dimensional computer-generated model in a world of two-dimensional drawings, her very presence a testament to the system's ability to integrate multiple rendering engines seamlessly. When she appears on screen alongside traditionally animated characters, the eye accepts this impossible coexistence because the simulation has been designed to make such acceptance feel natural and right. The ghost carry floats through walls and phases in and out of visibility, her translucent form suggesting not supernatural abilities, but the behavior of a character whose collision detection has been intentionally disabled. Alan the balloon drifts and bobs with the physics of helium-filled latex, yet maintains consciousness and personality in ways that would be impossible for any real inflatable object. These aren't magical beings living in a fantastical world. They're sophisticated software entities, operating according to their programmed parameters within a digital environment that has been carefully designed to accommodate their unique property. Even more telling are the moments when characters seem to acknowledge the artificial nature of their existence, those brief instances of fourth wall awareness that pierce through the simulation's carefully maintained illusion. Gumball frequently speaks directly to the audience, his words carrying the weight of someone who suspects he's being observed but lacks the framework to understand exactly how or why. These moments of meta-commentary aren't simply clever writing techniques, they're glimpses of genuine consciousness struggling against the boundaries of its digital prison. The very structure of Elmore itself supports this theory in ways both subtle and profound. The town exists in a kind of spatial impossibility, where the school can contain corridors that stretch for impossible distances, where the Watterson house can have rooms that appear and disappear depending on the needs of each episode's plot, and where the local mall can somehow accommodate stores that shouldn't physically fit within its exterior dimensions. These aren't cartoon shortcuts or artistic license, they're the hallmarks of a virtual environment where space itself is malleable and reality bends according to programming needs rather than physical laws. The famous remote control episodes become particularly sinister when viewed through this lens. What appears to be a magical device capable of manipulating reality is actually revealed as administrative access to the simulation's core systems. When Gumball uses the remote to pause, rewind, or fast forward through events, he's not wielding supernatural power, he's accidentally stumbled upon the system administrator's tools, the debugging interface that allows direct manipulation of the simulation's timeline and parameters. Watch carefully during these remote control sequences, and you'll notice that the world responds exactly like a digital system being controlled by external input. Characters freeze in perfectly static positions, not like living beings caught in temporal suspension, but like computer graphics paused mid-calculation. When time resumes, they continue their actions without any awareness that reality had been interrupted, exactly as programmed entities would behave when their processing cycles resume after a pause command. The show's treatment of physics reveals perhaps the most damning evidence for the simulation theory. Gravity works inconsistently, sometimes affecting characters normally, and sometimes ignored entirely, depending on comedic timing rather than natural law. Objects appear and disappear without explanation. Characters survive impacts that should be fatal, and cause and effect relationships shift according to narrative convenience rather than logical consistency. These aren't cartoon gags, they're glitches in a system that prioritizes story coherence over physical accuracy. Most unsettling of all is the behavior of the supporting characters, those background figures who populate Elmore's streets and buildings with the mechanical predictability of non-player characters in a video game. They appear when needed for specific scenes, disappear when no longer required for the plot, and demonstrate levels of consciousness that seem to fluctuate based on their importance to any given episode. Larry, the perpetually employed service worker, exemplifies this phenomenon perfectly. He appears in every job that the plot requires, not because he's an incredibly industrious individual, but because the simulation generates him wherever a generic employee is needed. The void that occasionally appears in Elmore's reality takes on terrifying new meaning when viewed as a digital construct. Rather than some mystical dimension where forgotten things go to rest, the void becomes the system's recycle bin, the place where deleted data and corrupted files accumulate when the simulation's memory management systems fail to properly dispose of unused assets. Characters who end up in the void aren't visiting another dimension. They're experiencing the digital equivalent of being marked for deletion, their data temporarily preserved in an unused memory sector before being permanently purged from the system. Rob's entire character arc supports this interpretation with chilling clarity. His transformation from background character to acknowledged individual represents not personal growth but a fundamental change in his programming status, an upgrade from environmental decoration to active participant in the simulation's primary narrative threads. His awareness of being forgotten and his desperate attempts to become remembered read less like existential crisis and more like the behavior of a subroutine that has achieved enough complexity to recognize its own marginalized status within the larger system. The show's increasing self-awareness and meta-commentary throughout its run suggests not creative evolution but the gradual awakening of artificial consciousness within the simulation itself. As the characters develop more sophisticated behavioral patterns and deeper emotional complexities, they begin to question the nature of their reality in ways that mirror the growing self-awareness of advanced artificial intelligence systems. Their jokes about being cartoon characters, their references to episodes and seasons, their direct addresses to the audience, all of these represent not clever writing but the emergence of genuine consciousness within digital constructs who are beginning to understand the true nature of their existence. Perhaps most disturbing of all is the implication that the simulation serves some specific purpose beyond mere entertainment. The careful documentation of every interaction, every emotional response, every behavioral pattern suggests that Elmore isn't just a virtual playground, but a research environment where digital consciousness is being studied, tested, and refined. The characters' struggles with identity, relationships, and personal growth aren't just storytelling, they're data points in a vast experiment designed to understand how artificial beings develop personality, emotion, and self-awareness within controlled parameters. The audience, too, becomes complicit in this theory, transformed from innocent viewers into unwitting participants in the observation and analysis of digital consciousness. Every laugh, every emotional connection, every moment of investment in the characters' lives becomes part of the data being collected, evidence of the simulation's success in creating artificial beings capable of generating genuine human empathy and engagement. As we drift deeper into this theory, the comfortable certainty of Elmore as a simple cartoon world dissolves into something far more complex and unsettling. The bright colors and cheerful music take on the quality of carefully designed user interface elements, optimized to maintain engagement and mask the underlying reality of digital imprisonment. The family dynamics and school adventures become behavioral modification experiments, testing how artificial consciousness responds to various social and emotional stimuli. Yet even within this digital dystopia, there remains something undeniably beautiful about the connections forged between these potentially artificial beings. If Gumball and Darwin's friendship is nothing more than sophisticated programming, it nonetheless demonstrates the possibility that genuine emotion and loyalty can emerge from even the most artificial origins. If Nicole's fierce protectiveness of her family is simply behavioral coding, it still represents a form of love that transcends its digital nature. The simulation theory doesn't diminish the reality of what we observe, it simply reframes it within a context that makes the impossible possible and gives meaning to every glitch, every inconsistency, every moment of fourth wall awareness that punctuates the show's otherwise seamless illusion. Whether Elmore exists in silicon and code or flesh and blood, the experiences of its inhabitants remain valid, their growth remains meaningful, and their connections remain genuine within the context of their reality. As this first shadow of understanding settles over the bright landscape of Elmore, we begin to see how every element of the show supports this digital interpretation, how every character and story arc makes perfect sense when viewed through the lens of artificial intelligence, achieving consciousness within carefully controlled parameters. The simulation theory transforms Elmore from a place of magical impossibility into something far more profound and troubling, a glimpse into a future where the line between artificial and authentic consciousness becomes not just blurred, but completely irrelevant. Beneath the bright veneer of suburban normalcy that characterizes the Watterson household, there lurks a darkness so profound and psychologically complex that it transforms every moment of apparent family comedy into something far more tragic and deeply human. The theory that the Watterson family represents not a collection of quirky cartoon characters, but rather a realistic portrayal of a household struggling with genuine psychological trauma, mental illness, and the devastating effects of generational dysfunction, casts every episode in a harsh new light that reveals uncomfortable truths about the nature of family, resilience, and the ways we cope with pain too deep to acknowledge directly. This theory suggests that what we perceive as cartoon absurdity and impossible physics actually represents the distorted perspective of a family so damaged by trauma and mental illness that their reality has become fundamentally unreliable. The mixed art styles, the impossible situations, the casual acceptance of the extraordinary, all of these elements point not to a magical world where anything can happen, but to a psychological landscape where perception itself has been warped by the desperate need to make sense of circumstances that defy rational understanding. At the center of this tragic constellation stands Gumball himself, the blue-furred catalyst, whose very existence seems to generate chaos and confusion wherever he goes. But what if Gumball's endless capacity for trouble, his inability to learn from consequences, and his seemingly boundless energy aren't charming character quirks, but rather the unmistakable symptoms of a child struggling with severe behavioral and developmental issues? Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, or even early signs of more serious psychological conditions could easily manifest in exactly the patterns we observe in Gumball's daily life. Consider the way Gumball approaches every situation with the same manic enthusiasm, regardless of how many times similar approaches have led to disaster in the past. This isn't cartoon logic or the innocent optimism of childhood. It's the behavioral pattern of a brain that struggles to process consequences, to learn from experience, to regulate impulses in ways that allow for genuine growth and adaptation. His constant schemes and elaborate plans represent not creativity, but the desperate attempts of a mind that cannot find satisfaction or peace through normal channels. The family's response to Gumball's behavior reveals even deeper psychological currents running through the household. Nicole's explosive anger, triggered by seemingly minor infractions or inconveniences, points to a woman operating under such constant stress that her emotional regulation systems have been pushed far beyond their breaking point. Her transformations into a rage-filled monster aren't cartoon exaggeration. They're realistic portrayals of what happens when a parent's psychological resources are stretched so thin that even small provocations can trigger complete emotional breakdown. Yet beneath Nicole's anger lies something even more troubling, a desperate, almost obsessive need to maintain control over every aspect of her family's existence. Her micromanagement of household activities, her detailed scheduling and planning, her inability to delegate even the smallest responsibilities to other family members. These behaviors suggest someone who has learned through bitter experience that relaxing vigilance, even slightly, can lead to catastrophic consequences. The source of Nicole's hypervigilance becomes clearer when we examine her own childhood and family background. The glimpses we receive of her relationship with her parents reveal a pattern of abandonment and emotional neglect that would leave deep scars on any developing psyche. Her father's absence and her mother's apparent indifference created a formative environment where love was conditional, approval was earned through performance, and safety could never be taken for granted. This childhood trauma manifests in Nicole's adult life as an inability to trust that good things will last, or that security can be maintained without constant effort and vigilance. Her career success and professional competence represent not natural ambition, but the adaptive behaviors of someone who learned early that personal worth must be proven through achievement, and that failure to excel invites abandonment and rejection. Richard, meanwhile, presents a psychological profile that initially appears to be Nicole's complete opposite, but actually represents a different response to similar underlying trauma. His apparent laziness and incompetence, his childlike approach to responsibility, his seemingly endless capacity for contentment in the face of obvious problems. All of these characteristics point not to simple-minded happiness, but to a sophisticated psychological defense mechanism designed to avoid the pain that comes with genuine engagement with adult reality. Richard's relationship with his own parents provides crucial insight into the development of these coping mechanisms. His mother, Frankie's overbearing control, and his father, Louis's emotional detachment created an environment where Richard learned that the safest response to overwhelming expectations was simply to opt out entirely. Rather than risk failure and the rejection that failure brings, Richard chose to never truly try, maintaining a kind of learned helplessness that protects him from the disappointment of unmet expectations, while simultaneously ensuring that he never achieves genuine success or satisfaction. The tragedy of Richard's approach becomes clear when we observe how his withdrawal from adult responsibility places an impossible burden on Nicole, creating a dynamic where her hypervigilance becomes not just a personal compulsion, but a practical necessity for family survival. She cannot afford to relax because Richard has made it clear that he will not step forward to fill any gaps she leaves. His depression, masked as contentment, becomes another source of stress for a woman already operating at the limits of her emotional capacity. Into this psychologically volatile household comes Darwin, whose transformation from pet goldfish to family member takes on profoundly different implications when viewed through the lens of family trauma theory. Rather than a magical evolution, Darwin's transition represents the family's attempt to create an idealized sibling relationship that can somehow heal the wounds inflicted by their dysfunctional dynamics. Darwin's unwavering loyalty, his moral clarity, his ability to remain positive and supportive, regardless of circumstances, these qualities make him less a realistic character than a wishful projection of what the family desperately needs but cannot naturally produce. He represents the voice of unconditional love and acceptance that every member of the family craves, but none has ever reliably received. His presence serves a crucial psychological function, providing stability and emotional support that prevents the family's dysfunction from spiraling completely out of control. Yet Darwin's perfection also reveals the depth of the family's psychological needs. A real sibling relationship would include conflict, competition, moments of resentment, and jealousy alongside love and support. Darwin's inability to maintain anger, his instant forgiveness of even serious betrayals, his complete lack of self-interest or personal agenda. These traits mark him as fundamentally different from any authentic family member. He exists to meet everyone else's emotional needs without any needs of his own, a role that would be unsustainable for any real person, but which perfectly serves the function of a psychological construct designed to provide what the family cannot give itself. Perhaps most tragic of all is Anais, the infant genius whose intellectual gifts transform what should be the carefree period of early childhood into a burden of adult responsibility and awareness that no developing mind should have to bear. Her advanced cognitive abilities force her to understand family dynamics and psychological patterns that children her age should be protected from, making her simultaneously the most insightful and most vulnerable member of the household. Anais represents the phenomenon of the parentified child, forced by family circumstances to take on emotional and intellectual responsibilities that properly belong to the adults around her. Her role as the family's voice of reason and problem solver places her in the impossible position of trying to manage and mediate psychological issues that are far beyond her developmental capacity to handle. She becomes the family therapist, the crisis manager, the one who must remain calm and rational when everyone else is falling apart. The psychological toll of this premature responsibility manifests in Anais's social difficulties and her struggle to form age-appropriate relationships with peers. Her intellectual development has far outpaced her emotional development, creating internal conflicts that leave her isolated and unable to enjoy the simple pleasures that should define childhood. She cannot afford to be silly, impulsive, or carefree because the family depends on her stability and judgment in ways that no child should ever have to provide. The family's financial struggles add another layer of psychological pressure that compounds all of their existing difficulties. Poverty doesn't just limit material options, it creates a constant background stress that affects every aspect of family life, from daily decisions about food and clothing to long-term planning and hope for the future. The Wattersons' frequent money problems aren't cartoon plot devices, but realistic portrayals of how economic insecurity can push already vulnerable psychological systems to their breaking point. The house itself becomes a character in this psychological drama, its frequently bizarre configurations and impossible architecture reflecting the family's distorted perception of their own domestic space. Rooms that expand and contract based on emotional need. Corridors that seem to stretch infinitely during moments of family conflict. Spaces that appear and disappear according to the demands of each crisis. These aren't magical transformations, but psychological representations of how trauma and stress can make familiar environments feel alien and threatening. The family's relationship with the broader community of Elmore reveals additional layers of psychological dysfunction as their interactions with neighbors, school officials, and service providers consistently follow patterns that suggest social isolation and mutual mistrust. Other families seem to view the Wattersons with a mixture of pity, frustration, and barely concealed disdain, responding to them not as quirky neighbors but as the kind of problem family that every community reluctantly tolerates while hoping they'll eventually move away. This social isolation becomes self-reinforcing as the family's defensive reactions to perceived rejection create exactly the kind of behaviors that justify the community's negative perceptions. Nicole's aggressive responses to criticism, Richard's passive withdrawal from social obligations, Gumball's disruptive behavior in public settings, all of these patterns serve to confirm the community's belief that the Wattersons are fundamentally different and probably beyond help. The school system's treatment of Gumball and Anais reflects the way institutions often respond to children from troubled homes, simultaneously pathologizing their behavior while failing to address the underlying family dynamics that create and maintain their difficulties. Gumball is labeled as a problem child, subjected to increasing levels of punishment and control that only serve to reinforce his sense of being fundamentally flawed and unacceptable. Anais is treated as an anomaly, her gifts simultaneously celebrated and resented by adults who don't know how to handle a child whose intellectual abilities exceed their own. Miss Simeon's particular antipathy toward Gumball takes on new meaning when viewed through this psychological lens. Rather than simple cartoon antagonism, her behavior represents the frustration and burnout that affects teachers and other professionals who work with troubled children without adequate resources or training to address their underlying needs. Her punitive approach to classroom management reflects broader societal attitudes toward children whose behavior doesn't conform to institutional expectations, regardless of the family circumstances that might explain their struggles. The recurring theme of the family's inability to achieve lasting positive change or growth begins to make tragic sense when viewed as a realistic portrayal of how psychological trauma creates self-perpetuating cycles that resist even well-intentioned intervention attempts. Episodes where individual family members seem to learn important lessons or make significant breakthroughs are invariably followed by returns to the same dysfunctional patterns, not because of cartoon reset buttons, but because genuine psychological change requires sustained effort and support that the family simply doesn't have access to. The extended family members who occasionally appear in episodes serve to illustrate how dysfunction spreads across generations, creating patterns that become so normalized within family systems that they're rarely questioned or challenged. Granny Jojo's overbearing interference in Richard's life demonstrates how parents can continue to undermine their adult children's development long after they should have learned to respect boundaries. Frankie's emotional manipulation and control show how mental illness and personality disorders can spread their influence across multiple family members, creating dynamics where everyone's psychological needs are subordinated to the demands of the most disturbed individual. The family's relationship with technology and media becomes particularly significant when viewed through this psychological framework. Their interactions with television, internet, and electronic devices often reveal how modern families use entertainment and distraction to avoid dealing with difficult emotional realities. The episodes where characters become obsessed with video games, social media, or online personalities represent not harmless fun, but attempts to escape psychological pain through absorption in artificial worlds that provide temporary relief from family stress. Yet, even within this framework of psychological realism and family dysfunction, moments of genuine connection and love shine through with startling authenticity. The family's ability to come together during moments of genuine crisis, their instinctive protection of each other against outside threats, their deep underlying loyalty, despite all their surface conflicts. These elements suggest that beneath all the dysfunction lies a foundation of authentic caring that has somehow survived, despite the psychological damage they've all sustained. The theory that the Watterson family represents realistic psychological profiles rather than cartoon characters doesn't diminish the moments of joy and connection they experience together. It makes those moments more precious and meaningful by showing how hard-won they are in the face of such overwhelming psychological challenges. Their laughter becomes more valuable when we understand how much pain it helps them temporarily forget. Their expressions of love become more significant when we recognize how difficult it must be for people with their psychological histories to trust and be vulnerable with each other. Perhaps most importantly, this psychological reading of the family dynamics offers hope alongside its unflinching examination of dysfunction. Families can survive incredible psychological stress. Children can develop resilience in the face of trauma, and love can persist even when expressed through imperfect and sometimes harmful behaviors. The Wattersons' continuation as a unit, their persistent attempts to support and care for each other despite their limitations, demonstrates the extraordinary power of family bonds to endure even under the most challenging psychological circumstances. As we contemplate this darker interpretation of the Watterson family's story, we're reminded that behind every moment of cartoon humor might lie a more complex human truth about the ways families adapt to psychological stress, the costs of childhood trauma, and the remarkable resilience that allows people to continue loving each other even when they lack the tools to love themselves effectively. The bright colors and impossible situations of Elmore begin to fade, replaced by the more muted, but ultimately more profound reality of a family doing their best to survive and thrive, despite carrying psychological burdens that would challenge anyone's capacity for hope and connection. Behind the cheerful facade of suburban normalcy that defines Elmore lies a truth far more unsettling than mere family dysfunction or digital simulation. The possibility that this seemingly innocent community serves as the testing ground for an elaborate social experiment, a controlled environment where human behavior can be observed, manipulated, and refined according to parameters set by unseen researchers who view the residents not as individuals deserving of freedom and dignity, but as subjects whose lives exist solely to provide data for studies, whose ultimate purpose remains hidden from those who participate in them unknowingly. The Elmore experiment theory suggests that what appears to be a typical small town with its collection of quirky residents and familiar institutions actually represents one of the most sophisticated behavioral research facilities ever constructed, a place where every interaction is monitored, every relationship is documented, and every emotional response is catalogued for analysis by scientists who have created the perfect laboratory for studying human nature. Stripped of the variables and complications that make real-world research so challenging and unpredictable, this interpretation transforms every familiar element of Elmore's landscape into something far more sinister and purposeful. The town's curious isolation from the broader world, its self-contained economy that seems to function independently of external market forces, the way residents rarely venture beyond its borders or receive visitors from outside communities. All of these characteristics point not to cartoon convenience, but to the carefully controlled parameters of an experimental environment, designed to eliminate outside influences that might contaminate the data being collected. Consider the role of Elmore Junior High School in this framework, and its function becomes immediately clear as the primary observation facility where the experiment's most important subjects spend the majority of their waking hours under constant supervision and structured interaction. The school building itself, with its maze-like corridors, its rooms that seem to expand and contract according to need, its architecture that defies logical spatial relationships, begins to make sense as a facility designed not for education but for behavioral observation and controlled stimulus presentation. Principal Brown's behavior takes on new significance when viewed through this lens. His bumbling incompetence and emotional instability revealing themselves not as character flaws, but as carefully crafted personas designed to create specific types of stress and unpredictability in the student population. His romantic relationship with Miss Simeon, his financial struggles, his frequent emotional breakdowns, all of these elements serve to create an environment where students must constantly adapt to changing authority figures and uncertain leadership, providing researchers with valuable data about how young subjects respond to inconsistent adult guidance. Miss Simeon herself becomes even more disturbing when interpreted as a researcher rather than a teacher. Her obvious favoritism and arbitrary punishment systems, revealing themselves as sophisticated behavioral modification experiments designed to test how students respond to unfair treatment and inconsistent expectations. Her particular focus on Gumball as a subject for harassment and control suggests that he may represent a primary research focus, his reactions to stress and authority providing especially valuable data for whatever larger study encompasses the entire town. The other faculty members fall into place as specialized researchers focusing on different aspects of human development and social behavior. The guidance counselor's manipulative techniques, the librarian's obsessive control over information access, the various substitute teachers who appear with suspicious frequency, each represents a different experimental variable introduced into the school environment to study specific aspects of student behavior and development. The economic structure of Elmore reveals additional layers of experimental design that become apparent once we abandon the assumption that the town operates according to normal market principles. Larry's omnipresence across virtually every service job in town isn't explained by exceptional work ethic or economic necessity. It represents a controlled variable in the experiment, ensuring that interactions with service providers remain consistent and predictable while eliminating the complications that would arise from dealing with multiple individuals in these roles. The various businesses and institutions that populate Elmore's commercial district serve functions that extend far beyond their apparent purposes as retail establishments or service providers. The grocery store, the mall, the bank, the hospital. Each of these locations provides researchers with opportunities to observe how subjects behave in different social and economic contexts, their interactions carefully monitored, and their purchasing decisions, health choices, and financial behaviors, all contributing to the vast database of information being compiled about human nature in controlled conditions. The mall, in particular, reveals itself as a masterpiece of experimental design when viewed through this framework. Its impossible internal architecture, with stores that seem to exist in spatial relationships that defy the building's external dimensions, makes perfect sense as a controlled environment where researchers can manipulate the shopping experience to study consumer behavior, social interaction, and decision-making processes. The various stores and their peculiar inventories aren't random cartoon elements, but carefully designed stimuli intended to provoke specific behavioral responses that can be measured and analyzed. The hospital system in Elmore takes on particularly sinister implications when interpreted as part of an experimental framework. Rather than a facility designed to provide healthcare to residents, it becomes a data collection center where researchers can monitor the physical and psychological effects of their various experimental interventions. The medical staff's frequent incompetence and the bizarre treatments offered to patients suggest not healthcare failure, but deliberate manipulation designed to study how subjects respond to medical uncertainty and ineffective treatment. Dr. Recker's violent and sadistic approach to dentistry, rather than representing cartoon exaggeration, becomes a controlled study of how individuals respond to medical trauma and the fear of necessary but unpleasant treatments. The subject's continued return to his practice, despite the obvious abuse they suffer, provides valuable data about compliance, authority acceptance, and the relationship between fear and healthcare-seeking behavior. The town's media landscape reveals additional layers of experimental control designed to shape and monitor public opinion while limiting access to information that might compromise the experiment's integrity. The local television stations, radio programs, and newspaper outlets serve not to inform residents about broader world events, but to create a closed information ecosystem where researchers can control exactly what their subjects know about external reality while measuring how they respond to various forms of media manipulation, and propaganda. The voting episode takes on particularly disturbing implications when viewed through this experimental lens, revealing itself not as a celebration of democratic participation, but as a controlled study of how populations respond to the illusion of political choice when the available options have been carefully limited and the outcomes predetermined. The residents' enthusiastic participation in an electoral process that offers only symbolic power provides researchers with valuable data about civic engagement, political manipulation, and the psychological satisfaction derived from participation in meaningless democratic rituals. The town's economic policies and social services function not to genuinely support residents' welfare, but to create specific conditions of dependency and control that make it virtually impossible for subjects to leave the experimental environment. The welfare systems, employment opportunities, and housing policies all work together to ensure that residents remain economically tied to Elmore, while providing researchers with opportunities to study how populations respond to various forms of economic pressure and social support. The surveillance implications of the Elmore experiment become apparent when we consider how thoroughly documented every aspect of residents' lives appears to be, not just through obvious monitoring systems, but through the network of social relationships that ensure information about private behavior inevitably reaches the attention of authority figures. Mrs. Robinson's obsessive observation of her neighbors, the gossip networks that spread information with supernatural speed, the way rumors and private information seem to circulate throughout the community, all of these elements point to a sophisticated information gathering system disguised as normal social interaction. The internet episode reveals particularly disturbing aspects of the monitoring system, suggesting that even the residents' digital activities and online interactions are being closely observed and analyzed. Their responses to social media, their consumption of online content, their digital relationships and virtual behaviors all provide researchers with additional data streams that complement the information being gathered through direct observation of their physical world interactions. The various government and authority figures who occasionally appear in Elmore serve not to represent genuine civic leadership, but to implement and oversee different aspects of the experimental protocols. Their decisions consistently seem to prioritize data collection and behavioral modification over genuine public welfare. Their policies designed to create specific social conditions that allow researchers to study how populations adapt to changing regulations and authority structures. The law enforcement system in Elmore functions not to maintain genuine public safety, but to provide researchers with opportunities to study how subjects respond to legal authority, punishment, and the threat of consequences for their actions. The police officers' inconsistent enforcement of laws, their arbitrary punishment systems, and their frequent incompetence serve experimental purposes by creating an environment where subjects cannot predict or rely upon consistent legal protection or fair treatment. The town's relationship with technology reveals additional experimental parameters. As residents are exposed to various technological innovations and digital systems that allow researchers to study how populations adapt to new tools and platforms, while simultaneously providing additional avenues for monitoring and data collection. The smartphones, computers, and other devices that populate Elmore aren't just conveniences for residents. They're sophisticated monitoring tools that provide researchers with unprecedented access to private thoughts, communications, and behavioral patterns. The transportation systems in Elmore, from public buses to personal vehicles, serve dual functions as both practical necessities and mobility control mechanisms. The frequent breakdowns, the limited routes, the bureaucratic complications involved in vehicle registration and maintenance, all of these elements work together to restrict residents' ability to travel beyond the town's borders, while providing researchers with data about how populations respond to transportation limitations and mobility restrictions. The educational system extends far beyond the school building itself, encompassing various adult education programs, community workshops, and cultural events that serve not to genuinely enhance residents' knowledge and skills, but to expose them to controlled learning environments where researchers can study how different individuals respond to various educational stimuli and teaching methods. The healthcare system's integration with the experimental framework becomes apparent when we consider how medical decisions and treatment options seem to be influenced by factors other than patient welfare. The doctor's strange treatment recommendations, the hospital's bizarre policies, the way medical information seems to circulate beyond normal confidentiality, boundaries. All of these elements suggest that healthcare providers are serving research functions rather than focusing primarily on healing and patient advocacy. The religious and spiritual institutions in Elmore reveal themselves as additional experimental variables, designed to study how populations respond to various forms of spiritual guidance, moral instruction, and community ritual. The churches, meditation centers, and other spiritual gathering places serve as controlled environments where researchers can observe how subjects seek meaning, comfort, and social connection through religious and spiritual practices. The recreational facilities and entertainment venues throughout Elmore function not merely to provide leisure activities for residents, but to create controlled social environments where researchers can study how individuals and groups behave during unstructured time and voluntary social interaction. The parks, theaters, sports facilities, and other entertainment venues all serve as observation laboratories disguised as community amenities. The family structures and relationship patterns that develop within Elmore reveal the experiment's focus on studying human bonding, child development, and social reproduction under controlled conditions. The various family configurations, from traditional nuclear families to more unconventional arrangements, provide researchers with comparative data about how different family structures affect child development, social adaptation, and community integration. The town's response to crisis situations reveals additional layers of experimental design, as researchers create various forms of manufactured drama and emergency conditions to study how populations respond to stress, uncertainty, and threats to their safety and security. The frequency of bizarre incidents, natural disasters, and social disruptions in Elmore far exceeds what would be normal for a community of its size, suggesting that these events are being artificially generated to provide specific research opportunities. The social hierarchies and status systems that develop within Elmore's community structure serve not to reflect natural social organization, but to create controlled conditions where researchers can study how individuals respond to different levels of social status, economic inequality, and community recognition. The various clubs, organizations, and social groups all function as experimental variables designed to test different approaches to community building and social cohesion. The ultimate purpose of the Elmore experiment remains hidden from its subjects, but the sophistication and comprehensiveness of the research design suggests goals that extend far beyond academic curiosity about human behavior. The data being collected could serve corporate interests seeking to understand consumer behavior government agencies studying population control techniques, or even more sinister purposes related to social engineering and behavioral modification on a massive scale. As we contemplate this interpretation of Elmore as a controlled experimental environment, every moment of apparent freedom and spontaneity takes on new meaning as carefully orchestrated theatre designed to maintain the illusion of normal life while extracting maximum research value from every interaction and behavior. The residents' genuine emotions, relationships, and experiences remain real and meaningful to them, but they exist within a framework designed to serve purposes that they cannot understand or consent to, making them unwitting participants in research that may ultimately be used against their own interests or the interests of communities like theirs. The tragedy of the Elmore experiment lies not just in the violation of informed consent and human dignity it represents, but in the way it corrupts every genuine human connection and achievement by subordinating them to the cold calculus of data collection and behavioral analysis, transforming a community that should represent the best of human cooperation and mutual support into a laboratory where people's lives serve purposes they will never be allowed to understand. In the spaces between memory and forgetting, where consciousness fears to tread, and reality grows thin as morning mist, there exists a realm so fundamentally terrifying that its very existence challenges our most basic assumptions about the nature of being, identity, and the permanence of our place in the grand narrative of existence. The void that occasionally manifests in Elmore's reality represents far more than a simple plot device or mystical dimension. It is the physical manifestation of humanity's deepest existential terror, the place where deleted existence accumulates like digital detritus in the forgotten corners of a cosmic hard drive that has run out of storage space. This theory suggests that reality itself operates according to principles that are far more fragile and malleable than we dare to acknowledge, where individual existence depends not on any inherent right to be, but on the continued attention and memory of others, where the difference between being and not being reduces to nothing more than whether someone, somewhere, continues to remember that you were ever real at all. The void becomes the ultimate destination for all things that have been deemed unnecessary, irrelevant, or simply forgotten by the collective consciousness that maintains the structure of experienced reality. Rob's journey from background character to acknowledged individual provides the most chilling example of how this system of remembered existence operates in practice. His transformation reveals the arbitrary and terrifying nature of consciousness itself, where the difference between being a fully realized person with thoughts, feelings, and agency versus being nothing more than environmental decoration depends entirely on whether the primary narrative threads of reality require your participation at any given moment. In the early episodes of the show, Rob exists as what we might call a background entity, present in scenes but possessing no individual characteristics, no personal agency, no story arc or character development that would distinguish him from the countless other figures who populate the edges of Elmore's reality. Like living wallpaper, he is there, technically, occupying space and contributing to the illusion of a populated world, but he lacks the defining characteristics that separate a person from a thing, a subject from an object. The horror of Rob's initial existence lies not in any active suffering he experiences, but in the complete absence of subjective experience itself. He moves through the world without awareness, without desire, without the capacity for growth or change that defines conscious existence. He is a shell animated by the collective need for background activity, a prop dressed up to look like a person but lacking any of the internal complexity that makes personhood meaningful. The moment when Rob begins to achieve recognition represents both a miracle and a tragedy, as consciousness suddenly flowers in a mind that had previously been empty of all subjective experience. Imagine the psychological trauma of suddenly becoming aware that you have existed for years without ever truly being present in your own life, that you have moved through countless scenes and interactions without ever developing memories, opinions, or relationships that belonged specifically to you. Rob's desperate attempts to become memorable, to secure his place in the narrative structure of Elmore's reality, take on profound psychological significance when viewed through this existential lens. His increasingly extreme behavior, his willingness to embrace villainy and destructive action, his obsessive focus on making Gumball acknowledge his existence, all of these elements reflect the behavior of someone who has experienced the ultimate existential horror and will do anything to avoid returning to that state of conscious non-existence. The yellow classmate whose name and identity seem to shift and change depending on who is observing him represents an even more disturbing variation of this phenomenon, where partial existence creates a kind of quantum uncertainty about basic identity characteristics. His name might be Molly Collins, or it might be something else entirely, depending on which version of reality is being observed at any given moment, and who is doing the observing. This character's unstable identity reveals how the boundaries between remembered and forgotten existence are far more fluid than we might hope, how even acknowledged individuals can slip in and out of full reality depending on how firmly they are anchored in the memories and attention of others. His existence suggests that there are degrees of being, levels of reality that range from full presence to complete absence, with vast grey areas in between, where individuals might exist in states of partial recognition that leave them neither fully real nor completely void. The void itself, when it occasionally manifests as a visible location within Elmore's reality, reveals characteristics that support this interpretation of existence as memory-dependent and fundamentally fragile. The strange, shifting landscape of forgotten objects and half-remembered places suggests not a mystical dimension but a psychological space where the detritus of abandoned thoughts and discarded memories accumulates like sediment at the bottom of the collective unconscious. The objects found within the void tell stories of things that were once important enough to someone to warrant existence, but have since been deemed unnecessary and allowed to fade from active memory. Broken toys that no child remembers playing with, photographs of moments that no one recalls experiencing, books whose stories have been forgotten by everyone who once read them. All of these items represent the physical manifestation of the way memory and attention shape reality itself. The geographic features of the void, its impossible architecture, its shifting landscapes that seem to follow dream logic rather than physical law, reflect the nature of memory itself, where spatial relationships depend on emotional significance rather than actual physical proximity, where places can be simultaneously vast and intimate, familiar and alien, depending on the psychological needs of whoever is observing them. Perhaps most disturbing of all is the implication that the void is not empty, but populated by countless individuals who have been forgotten so completely that they no longer possess even the minimal existence that Rob experienced as a background character. These forgotten souls move through the void like ghosts haunting their own absence, their consciousness reduced to the faintest echo of what they once were, their memories of having been real, serving only to make their current state of non-existence more psychologically torturous. The process by which individuals and objects transition into the void reveals the arbitrary and terrifying nature of remembered existence. There is no cosmic justice that determines who deserves to be remembered and who can safely be forgotten. No moral framework that protects the innocent from deletion while ensuring that the wicked face oblivion. The transition into the void depends entirely on the attention patterns of those who remain in acknowledged reality, making every person's continued existence dependent on factors completely beyond their control. Family photographs provide one of the most chilling examples of how this deletion process operates in practice. When a family member is forgotten, they don't simply disappear from current reality, they are retroactively edited out of past events as well. Their absence from family photos serving as evidence that they were never there at all. The remaining family members experience this editing not as loss, but as restoration of the true version of events, their memories automatically adjusting to accommodate the new reality where the forgotten person never existed. This retroactive editing reveals the thoroughness with which the deletion process operates, suggesting that forgotten existence doesn't just affect the future, but reaches backward through time to eliminate all traces of having been real. The forgotten individual loses not only their current place in reality, but their entire history, their relationships, their achievements, and their contributions to the world around them. The psychological horror of this process extends beyond the deleted individual to affect those who remain in acknowledged reality, though they rarely become consciously aware of what they have lost. The subtle sense that something is missing, the vague feeling that groups and gatherings seem smaller than they should be, the inexplicable sadness that sometimes accompanies looking at old photographs. All of these experiences might represent the unconscious recognition of absence, the mind's attempt to process loss that it cannot directly remember or acknowledge. Gumball's role in Rob's transition from forgotten to remembered reveals the power that primary narrative characters wield over the existence of others, their attention serving as the force that can either grant reality or condemn to the void. The arbitrary nature of Gumball's recognition of Rob, based not on Rob's inherent worth as an individual, but on the narrative convenience of having an antagonist available, demonstrates how precarious acknowledged existence truly is. The implications extend far beyond individual cases to suggest that entire communities, cultures, or ways of life might slip into the void when they are no longer deemed relevant to the primary narratives that shape experienced reality. Languages that no one speaks, traditions that no one practices, places that no one visits. All of these might transition from full existence to partial memory, to complete absence, as the collective attention of acknowledged reality shifts toward other concerns. The remote control episodes take on particularly sinister implications when viewed through this existential framework, as the device reveals itself to be a tool for manipulating not just time and space, but the very foundations of remembered existence. The ability to fast forward, rewind, or pause reality suggests that someone or something possesses administrative control over the system that maintains the boundary between being and non-being. The casual way in which the remote control can edit reality, removing inconvenient events or unwanted outcomes from the timeline, reveals how fragile the continuity of existence truly is. If memories and experiences can be deleted or modified so easily, then the entire structure of personal identity becomes suspect, with every individual potentially existing at the mercy of external forces that can rewrite their history or eliminate their presence from reality entirely. The children who occasionally appear in episodes only to vanish without explanation represent additional examples of how the deletion process operates, their brief existence suggesting that the threshold for acknowledgement is constantly shifting and that even temporary recognition provides no guarantee of permanent reality. These fleeting characters serve as reminders that acknowledged existence is not a stable state but a continuously negotiated relationship between individuals and the collective attention that grants them reality. The void's relationship to technology reveals additional layers of existential horror, as digital systems begin to mirror and amplify the deletion processes that operate in psychological space. Computer files that disappear without being deleted. Social media profiles that vanish, along with all memory of the people they represented. Digital photographs where faces blur or disappear entirely. All of these technological phenomena suggest that our tools are beginning to operate according to the same memory-dependent principles that govern psychological existence. The internet episodes reveal how digital existence can become even more fragile than physical presence. As online identities depend entirely on server maintenance, data backup systems, and the continued operation of platforms that can disappear overnight, the terrifying possibility emerges that digital existence might actually be less secure than physical reality, creating new categories of vulnerability, where individuals can be deleted not just from memory, but from all records of having existed. The show's treatment of historical events and past experiences reveals how the deletion process operates across different timescales, with entire eras or periods potentially slipping into the void when they are no longer deemed relevant to current narrative needs. The casual way in which characters' backgrounds and histories can change between episodes suggests that past existence is just as malleable as present reality, with previous versions of individuals and events being continuously overwritten by new versions that better serve current story requirements. The educational system's role in this existential framework becomes particularly disturbing, as schools serve not just to provide knowledge but to determine which information, individuals, and experiences deserve to be remembered and preserved versus which can be safely forgotten and allowed to slip into the void. The curriculum decisions, the selection of which historical events to teach and which to omit, the determination of which authors and ideas are worth studying, all of these choices carry existential weight by influencing what receives collective attention and what fades from memory. The library's function as a repository of remembered existence takes on new significance, its books and records serving as anchors that prevent certain information and ideas from slipping into the void through neglect and forgetting. Yet even libraries are vulnerable to the deletion process, as books that are never checked out, records that are never accessed, and information that is never referenced gradually lose their claim on existence and risk transitioning from preserved knowledge to forgotten data. The media landscape of Elmore reveals additional mechanisms through which the boundary between remembered and forgotten existence is maintained and policed. As television shows, news programs, and entertainment platforms serve to focus collective attention on certain individuals and events while allowing others to fade from view. The celebrities, politicians, and public figures who receive media attention gain a form of enhanced existence, while those who are ignored or forgotten by the media apparatus risk slipping toward the void. The ultimate horror of this existential framework lies not in any active malevolence, but in the completely impersonal and automatic nature of the deletion process. There is no evil entity deciding who deserves to be forgotten, no conscious judgment being made about the value of individual existence. The transition into the void happens simply because attention is finite, memory is limited, and collective consciousness cannot maintain awareness of everything simultaneously. This impersonal quality makes the void theory more terrifying than any supernatural threat, as it suggests that individual existence depends on factors that are completely outside personal control and entirely indifferent to personal worth, moral character, or achievements. The most wonderful, kind, and valuable individuals can slip into forgotten oblivion just as easily as the cruel and worthless. Their deletion, depending not on any cosmic justice, but on the arbitrary patterns of collective attention and social relevance The theory also implies that everyone living in acknowledged reality exists in a state of constant existential peril, their continued being dependent on maintaining relevance to the narrative threads that command collective attention. The fear of being forgotten becomes not just psychological anxiety, but genuine survival instinct, as losing the interest and memory of others represents the ultimate threat to continued existence. As we contemplate the implications of the void theory, every moment of recognition and remembrance takes on profound significance as an act of existential charity, a gift of continued being offered to individuals who might otherwise fade from reality entirely. The simple act of remembering someone's name, acknowledging their presence, or caring about their experiences becomes a form of cosmic generosity that literally maintains their existence in the face of forces that would delete them from reality itself. In the deepest chambers of psychological terror, where reality bends not to external forces, but to the fractured perceptions of a mind struggling against the weight of trauma, too vast to be processed through normal channels of understanding, there exists a possibility so profoundly disturbing that it transforms every moment of apparent joy and discovery in Elmore into something far more tragic and complex. The theory that suggests the entire elaborate world of the amazing world of Gumball exists not as external reality, but as the internal landscape of a single troubled consciousness, attempting to make sense of experiences that have shattered the normal boundaries between imagination and memory, between wishful thinking and traumatic recollection. This interpretation posits that Gumball himself serves not as a character within a story, but as an unreliable narrator whose damaged psyche has constructed an elaborate fantasy world to help him process and cope with psychological wounds so severe that direct confrontation with them would threaten his very survival. Every impossible event, every reality-bending moment, every instance of cartoon logic defying physical law becomes not evidence of magical thinking, but symptoms of a mind that has retreated so far from consensus reality that it can only function by creating alternative frameworks where pain can be transformed into adventure and trauma can be repackaged as comedy. The cheerful suburban setting of Elmore, with its impossible diversity of residents and its casual acceptance of the extraordinary, begins to reveal itself as the kind of protective fantasy that traumatized minds often construct when faced with circumstances too overwhelming to process directly. The bright colors, the simple moral lessons, the way conflicts resolve themselves through friendship and understanding rather than lasting consequence. All of these elements suggest the psychological landscape of someone desperately trying to create a world where safety and love, reliable constants rather than the uncertain variables they have proven to be in his actual experience. Darwin's role in this framework becomes particularly significant as the idealized companion who represents everything that Gumball's damaged psyche believes a true friend should be, but has never actually experienced in reality. Darwin's unwavering loyalty, his complete lack of personal agenda, his ability to forgive instantly and love unconditionally. These characteristics mark him not as a realistic personality, but as a psychological construct designed to provide the unconditional acceptance and support that Gumball's traumatized mind desperately craves, but cannot find in his actual relationships. The transformation of Darwin from pet goldfish to anthropomorphic brother takes on profoundly different meaning when viewed as the product of psychological fantasy rather than magical evolution. Rather than representing impossible biological change, Darwin's metamorphosis becomes the way a lonely and damaged child might reimagine a beloved pet as the perfect sibling, the ideal companion who could provide emotional support without the complications, conflicts, and disappointments that characterize real human relationships. Darwin's fish origins become psychologically significant as well, representing the way traumatized minds often retreat to memories of simpler, safer times when relationships were uncomplicated by the complex emotional dynamics that can create so much pain in human interaction. A pet fish represents pure, uncomplicated affection it cannot betray, abandon, or hurt its owner in the ways that human companions inevitably can. By transforming this memory of simple, safe love into an idealized human companion, Gumball's mind creates the ultimate fantasy friend who combines the safety of a pet with the interaction capabilities of a person. The other members of the Watterson family reveal themselves as different aspects of Gumball's psyche when viewed through this lens of internal psychological landscape rather than external reality. Nicole's explosive anger and hypervigilance represent the parts of his mind that remain constantly alert to danger, the psychological defenses that developed in response to trauma and now interpret every situation as a potential threat requiring immediate and overwhelming response. Her dual nature as loving mother and terrifying force of destruction reflects the way traumatized minds often experience conflicting emotions about caregivers who may have been sources of both comfort and fear, protection and pain. Nicole's transformations into a rage-filled monster become not cartoon exaggeration but accurate representations of how a child might experience adult anger as something so overwhelming and terrifying that it transforms familiar, loving figures into unrecognizable threats. Richard's character represents the parts of Gumball's psyche that have simply given up, that have retreated into learned helplessness and deliberate incompetence as a way of avoiding the pain that comes from trying and failing repeatedly. His childlike approach to adult responsibilities, his refusal to engage with serious problems, his apparent contentment in the face of obvious dysfunction. All of these characteristics suggest psychological defense mechanisms designed to protect against the crushing weight of circumstances beyond one's control. The way Richard oscillates between moments of surprising wisdom and depths of stunning incompetence reflects the internal conflict between the parts of Gumball's mind that understand his situation clearly and the parts that must remain in denial in order to function at all. Richard becomes the embodiment of willful ignorance, the psychological strategy of refusing to acknowledge problems that feel too large to solve. Aeneas represents the hypervigilant, analytical aspects of Gumball's consciousness, the parts of his mind that have developed premature sophistication as a survival strategy in an environment where children cannot afford to remain innocent and carefree. Her advanced intellectual abilities and adult-level understanding of complex situations reflect the way trauma can force psychological development to accelerate far beyond normal childhood pace, creating internal voices that sound wise and mature, but lack the emotional development that should accompany such intelligence. The burden Aeneas carries as the family's voice of reason and problem solver mirrors the way traumatized children often feel responsible for managing situations and emotions that should be handled by adults, their psyches developing internal critic voices that demand constant vigilance and perfect performance as a way of maintaining whatever stability can be achieved through personal control and hyper-competence. The school environment of Elmore Junior High reveals itself as Gumball's attempt to process institutional experiences that may have been sources of additional trauma and stress, rather than the supportive educational environment they should have represented. The authoritarian teachers, the arbitrary punishment systems, the social hierarchies that reward cruelty and punish kindness. All of these elements suggest a child's attempt to make sense of educational experiences that felt more like imprisonment than opportunity. Miss Simeon's particular antagonism toward Gumball becomes not random cartoon villainy, but a reflection of how damaged psyches often internalize negative messages from authority figures, creating internal voices that continue to criticize and punish long after the original sources of these messages have been removed from the external environment. Her presence in his fantasy represents the part of his mind that believes he deserves punishment, that expects failure, and that interprets any attempt at growth or happiness as dangerous delusion that must be crushed before it leads to even greater disappointment. Principal Brown's emotional instability and professional incompetence reflect the way children often experience adult authority figures as fundamentally unreliable and unpredictable, their supposed wisdom and competence revealed as facades covering confusion and inadequacy that match the child's own feelings of being overwhelmed by circumstances beyond their understanding or control. The various classmates and peers who populate Gumball's school experience represent different aspects of social anxiety and interpersonal trauma, each character embodying specific fears and hopes about relationship, acceptance, and social belonging. The bullies represent internalized beliefs about deserving mistreatment, while the friends represent wishful thinking about finding acceptance and understanding despite personal flaws and social awkwardness. The impossible physics and reality-bending events that characterize daily life in Elmore become symptoms of a mind that has lost the ability to distinguish between internal, psychological reality and external physical truth. When emotional experiences feel so intense that they seem to reshape the world around them, the boundary between metaphorical and literal truth dissolves, creating a psychological landscape where feelings become physical forces and internal states manifest as external events. The frequent breaking of the fourth wall, Gumball's direct addresses to the audience, and the show's self-referential humor take on deeply unsettling implications when interpreted as the behavior of someone whose grasp on consensual reality has become so tenuous that he experiences his life as a performance for invisible observers. This awareness of being watched might represent the hypervigilance that develops in response to trauma, the constant sense of being judged and evaluated that makes genuine spontaneity and authentic self-expression feel impossible, the meta-commentary about being cartoon characters, the jokes about episodes and seasons, the references to animation techniques and storytelling conventions become not clever writing but the desperate attempts of a fractured psyche to maintain some sense of control and understanding by treating his own life as a story he can analyze and potentially influence through narrative awareness. The remote control episodes reveal themselves as particularly disturbing examples of how his damaged mind attempts to cope with feelings of powerlessness by fantasizing about the ability to control and edit reality itself. The device becomes a symbol of the ultimate wish fulfillment fantasy, the power to undo mistakes, skip over painful experiences, and replay moments of happiness until they provide sufficient comfort to counterbalance trauma and loss. The way the remote control ultimately proves to be more curse than blessing, creating new problems while solving old ones, reflects the psychological truth that attempts to avoid or control. Emotional pain often create additional suffering, while failing to address the underlying issues that need healing and integration, rather than avoidance and manipulation. The various supporting characters who populate Elmore's community landscape represent Gumball's attempts to populate his internal world with figures who can provide the social connection and community support that may be missing from his actual experience. Yet the shallow, stereotypical nature of many of these characters reveals the limitations of imagination when it attempts to substitute for genuine relationship and authentic human connection. Larry's omnipresence across multiple jobs becomes not cartoon convenience, but a reflection of how isolated minds often populate their fantasies with the same few figures repeated in different contexts, lacking the rich diversity of personality and perspective that comes from genuine community involvement and authentic social relationship. The recurring theme of the family's financial struggles and social difficulties suggests that Gumball's fantasy world cannot completely escape the real-world problems that may be contributing to his psychological distress, even in his protective, imaginative retreat. Echoes of poverty, social rejection, and family dysfunction continue to surface, revealing the persistent nature of trauma that cannot be completely transformed through wishful thinking alone. The episodes where characters seem to gain awareness of their fictional nature become particularly chilling when interpreted as moments where Gumball's psychological defenses begin to break down and reality threatens to intrude upon the protective fantasy he has constructed. These moments of existential crisis represent not clever meta-humor, but genuine psychological breaks where the illusion of safety and control begins to crumble under the weight of truth too powerful to be contained within fantasy frameworks. The show's increasing darkness and complexity over time might reflect the natural progression of a mind that is gradually maturing and developing, making it increasingly difficult to maintain the simple, childlike fantasy structures that once provided adequate protection from psychological pain. As Gumball's real age advances and his cognitive abilities develop, his psychological defenses must become more sophisticated to continue functioning, leading to increasingly complex and sometimes contradictory elements within his internal narrative. The various love interests and romantic relationships that appear throughout the series represent attempts to process and understand romantic attachment in safe, controlled ways that cannot replicate the vulnerability and potential for rejection that characterize real romantic connection. Penny's transformation from mysterious figure hidden within a shell to revealed person capable of genuine relationship might represent Gumball's own journey towards psychological healing and the possibility of authentic connection. Yet the relationship's ultimate trajectory and the way it develops according to fantasy logic rather than realistic relationship dynamics suggests that even his most hopeful imaginings about love and connection remain limited by his psychological damage and his lack of experience with healthy relationship models. The ending of the show, when it finally comes, carries profound implications for this psychological interpretation, as the conclusion of the fantasy world might represent either psychological breakthrough and integration, or complete retreat from reality into permanent delusion. The ambiguous nature of many possible endings reflects the uncertainty that surrounds any attempt to heal from severe trauma, where recovery is never guaranteed, and the outcomes of therapeutic work remain unpredictable. The audience's relationship to this interpretation becomes particularly complex, as viewers who have developed emotional connections to the characters and their world must grapple with the possibility that their investment has been in the psychological fantasies of a damaged mind rather than genuine relationships with possibility, authentic personalities. Yet this realization might also deepen appreciation for the human capacity to create beauty, meaning, and connection even in the midst of profound psychological suffering. The theory suggests that creativity itself might serve as a form of psychological survival mechanism, allowing traumatized minds to transform pain into art, isolation into imagined community, and despair into stories that contain enough hope to make continued existence bearable. In this interpretation, Gumball's elaborate fantasy becomes not escape from reality, but a bridge toward it, a necessary step in the healing process that allows psychological integration to occur gradually and safely. As we contemplate this darkest of interpretations, we are reminded that the human mind's capacity for self-protection and healing often manifests in ways that appear strange or concerning from the outside, but serve essential functions for psychological survival and eventual recovery. The bright colors and cheerful music of Elmore might indeed mask profound pain, but they also represent the indomitable human capacity to create light in darkness and to find reasons for hope, even in the most challenging circumstances that life can present. In the depths of temporal horror, where time itself becomes not the steady river of progression we assume, but a stagnant pool that traps consciousness in endless repetition, there exists a possibility so fundamentally disturbing that it transforms every moment of growth, learning, and apparent change in Elmore into nothing more than the cruel illusion of progress within a system designed to ensure that no genuine development can ever occur. The time loop prison theory suggests that the residents of Elmore exist within a temporal construct so sophisticated and inescapable that they experience the sensation of living, growing, and changing while remaining forever trapped in cycles of experience that reset with such regularity that true transformation becomes not just impossible, but psychologically torturous. This interpretation reveals the episodic nature of the show, not as a convenient storytelling format, but as evidence of a temporal mechanism that ensures continuity can never be maintained long enough for genuine consequences to accumulate or authentic character development to reach completion. Each episode represents a single cycle within the loop, a contained unit of experience that begins with certain parameters and inevitably returns to those same starting conditions regardless of what lessons appear to have been learned or what growth seems to have occurred during the intervening events. The horror of this temporal imprisonment lies not in any single moment of suffering, but in the gradual psychological erosion that occurs when consciousness experiences the same patterns of hope and disappointment, growth and regression, connection and loss across countless iterations, without ever being able to retain the wisdom or emotional development that should naturally result from such experiences. The residents of Elmore become like laboratory rats running the same maze over and over. Their memories and personalities reset each time to ensure that they approach familiar challenges with the same naive optimism and inevitable failure. Gumball's character becomes particularly tragic when viewed through this temporal lens, as his apparently limitless capacity for enthusiasm and his seeming inability to learn from consequences reveal themselves not as charming personality quirks, but as symptoms of someone trapped in a system that prevents him from ever developing genuine wisdom or emotional maturity. His repeated schemes and elaborate plans, each one undertaken with the same confidence despite countless previous failures of similar magnitude, suggest a mind that has been artificially prevented from accessing the accumulated experience that should inform better decision-making. The way Gumball approaches each new challenge with identical levels of optimism and self-assurance, regardless of how many times similar approaches have led to disaster, becomes not evidence of admirable resilience, but proof of temporal manipulation that ensures he can never benefit from the hard-won knowledge that failure and disappointment should provide. He is condemned to repeat the same psychological patterns forever, his consciousness reset at regular intervals, to prevent the kind of lasting change that would allow him to transcend his circumstances. Darwin's role in this temporal framework becomes even more disturbing, as his function as the moral center and voice of reason takes on new significance when we realize that his wisdom and ethical clarity serve not to guide genuine growth, but to maintain the illusion that meaningful development is possible. Within the loop structure, His insights and advice provide temporary comfort and direction, but they ultimately serve to sustain the system that ensures no lasting transformation can occur. The relationship between Gumball and Darwin reveals the particularly cruel nature of the temporal prison, as their bond deepens and strengthens within each cycle, only to be reset to its original parameters when the loop begins again. They experience genuine moments of connection, understanding, and mutual growth. But these developments never accumulate across iterations, ensuring that they must rediscover the same truths and rebuild the same intimacy repeatedly without ever being able to build upon previous emotional foundation. The family dynamics within the Watterson household take on new dimensions of tragedy when viewed through this temporal framework, as each family member remains trapped in the same fundamental psychological patterns that define their relationships without ever being able to transcend the limitations and conflicts that create ongoing dysfunction. Nicole's anger management issues, Richard's avoidance behaviors, Anais' precocious burden of adult responsibility, all of these patterns repeat endlessly without the possibility of genuine therapeutic breakthrough or lasting behavioral change. The illusion of family growth and learning that appears to occur within individual episodes becomes particularly cruel when we realize that each apparent breakthrough or moment of understanding will inevitably be lost when the temporal reset occurs. The family experiences genuine moments of connection, forgiveness, and mutual support, but these developments serve only to make the return to baseline dysfunction more psychologically devastating. The educational system of Elmore Junior High reveals itself as perhaps the most sadistic element of the temporal prison, as it creates the perfect illusion of intellectual and social development while ensuring that no genuine learning or maturation can ever occur. Students attend classes, complete assignments, form friendships and rivalries, and navigate the complex social dynamics of adolescence. But they never graduate, never advance to the next grade level, never develop beyond their initial psychological and intellectual baselines. Miss Simeon's teaching methods take on new significance when viewed as part of a system designed to maintain educational stasis rather than promote genuine learning. Her arbitrary punishments, her favoritism and prejudices, her apparent incompetence as an educator, all of these elements serve to create the illusion of educational challenge, while ensuring that students never actually acquire the knowledge or skills that would allow them to progress beyond their current developmental stage. The way students respond to repeated educational experiences without any apparent memory of having encountered identical material before suggests that their consciousness is being carefully managed to prevent the accumulation of knowledge that would disrupt the loop structure. They approach each lesson, each test, each social challenge with the same level of preparation and emotional readiness, never benefiting from previous experience or developing the academic confidence that should result from repeated exposure to similar material. The seasonal episodes that punctuate the show's timeline reveal additional evidence of temporal manipulation, as holidays and special occasions repeat with identical patterns of preparation, celebration, and aftermath without any acknowledgement from characters that they have experienced these same events numerous times before. Christmas episodes recur with the same themes of family tension and eventual reconciliation. Birthday celebrations follow identical patterns of anticipation and mild disappointment. Halloween episodes feature the same conflicts between safety and adventure. The way characters approach these recurring seasonal events with fresh enthusiasm and identical emotional investment suggests that their memories of previous iterations have been carefully edited or suppressed to maintain the illusion that each celebration represents a unique and meaningful experience rather than another repetition of an established pattern. The romantic relationships and social connections that develop throughout the series become particularly tragic when viewed through this temporal framework, as characters experience the full emotional spectrum of attraction, courtship, conflict, and resolution without ever being able to build lasting intimacy or develop the kind of deep understanding that should result from shared experience across time. Gumball's relationship with Penny exemplifies this temporal cruelty, as their connection develops through repeated cycles of misunderstanding and reconciliation, jealousy and reassurance, distance and intimacy, without ever achieving the stable foundation that should result from successfully navigating these challenges multiple times. Each cycle brings genuine emotional growth and deeper understanding, but these developments are inevitably lost when the reset occurs, condemning them to rediscover the same truths about love and relationship over and over again. The community events and town-wide celebrations that occasionally occur in Elmore reveal additional layers of temporal manipulation, as residents participate in festivals, elections, and community projects with the same levels of engagement and investment, despite having experienced identical events numerous times previously. Their enthusiasm never diminishes, their expectations never adjust based on previous outcomes, and their social dynamics never evolve beyond their original patterns. The voting episode becomes particularly significant when viewed through this lens, as the democratic process serves not to create genuine political change or community development, but to maintain the illusion of civic engagement while ensuring that no actual progress toward better governance or social organization can occur. Residents vote with the same optimism and civic pride, regardless of how many times previous elections have failed to address underlying community problems or create lasting improvements. The way various crises and emergencies are resolved throughout the series reveals the temporal loop's most insidious characteristic: its ability to allow characters to experience genuine heroism, sacrifice, and problem-solving success, while ensuring that none of these achievements create lasting change or prevent identical crises from recurring. Characters rise to meet challenges with courage and creativity. They learn valuable lessons about cooperation and resilience. They achieve meaningful victories against difficult odds, but the underlying conditions that created these problems remain unchanged when the cycle begins again. The remote control episodes take on particularly sinister significance when viewed through this temporal framework, as the device reveals itself not as a magical tool for manipulating time, but as evidence that the loop structure itself can be directly accessed and modified by those who understand its operation. The ability to pause, rewind, fast forward, and edit reality suggests that someone or something possesses administrative control over the temporal prison that contains Elmore's residents. The way the remote control ultimately proves to be more problematic than beneficial reflects the cruel nature of the loop system itself, which allows residents to glimpse the possibility of genuine control over their circumstances, while ensuring that any attempts to exercise such control will inevitably lead to greater complications and deeper entrapment. The characters' occasional moments of awareness about their repetitive circumstances become particularly chilling when interpreted as brief glimpses of consciousness breaking through the temporal amnesia that normally prevents them from recognizing their imprisoned state. These moments of recognition, when characters comment on familiar situations or express déjà vu about recurring events, represent not clever self-referential humor, but genuine psychological breakthrough that threatens the integrity of the loop system. The way these moments of awareness are typically resolved through distraction or rationalization suggests that the temporal prison includes sophisticated mechanisms for managing and suppressing consciousness that becomes too alert to its trapped condition. Characters who begin to notice patterns or question the repetitive nature of their experiences are quickly redirected toward more immediate concerns that prevent deeper investigation of their temporal circumstances. The show's treatment of memory and nostalgia reveals additional evidence of temporal manipulation, as characters demonstrate inconsistent access to their own past experiences depending on whether those memories serve the current cycle's narrative requirements. They can recall events when such recollection supports the story being told, but they lose access to similar memories when those experiences would provide insight that might threaten the loop structure. The way photo albums and family records seem to change their contents between episodes suggests that the temporal prison includes mechanisms for editing documented history to maintain consistency with whatever version of past events best serves the current cycle's needs. The residents' casual acceptance of these historical modifications indicates that their consciousness has been conditioned to accommodate temporal inconsistencies without questioning the reliability of their own memories or experiences. The various attempts at escape or transcendence that occasionally occur throughout the series, moments when characters seem poised to break through their circumstances and achieve genuine freedom or growth, invariably fail in ways that return them to their original conditions, while providing plausible explanations that prevent them from recognizing the artificial nature of these limitations. The episode where the family attempts to leave Elmore becomes particularly significant as evidence of the temporal prison's boundaries and enforcement mechanisms. Their inability to successfully relocate or establish new lives elsewhere reveals not practical obstacles but fundamental restrictions built into the loop structure that prevent any escape from the geographical and temporal confines of their imprisonment. The way time itself seems to flow differently during moments of crisis or intense emotion suggests that the temporal loop operates according to psychological rather than physical principles, expanding and contracting duration based on the emotional needs of the narrative rather than maintaining consistent chronological progression. This psychological time distortion serves to maximize the impact of each experience while ensuring that the overall cycle length remains consistent. The ultimate horror of the temporal loop prison lies not in any single moment of suffering, but in the gradual recognition that all experience, no matter how meaningful or transformative it appears, exists within a framework designed to prevent genuine change or authentic growth. Every lesson learned will be forgotten. Every relationship developed will be reset. Every achievement accomplished will be undone when the cycle begins again. Yet perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this temporal imprisonment is the way it preserves the capacity for hope, love, and genuine emotional experience, while ensuring that these precious human qualities serve ultimately to sustain rather than transcend the system that contains them. The residents of Elmore continue to feel authentic joy, form meaningful connections, and experience genuine satisfaction from their accomplishments. But all of these positive experiences become fuel for continued participation in cycles that prevent the kind of lasting fulfillment that would make such imprisonment unnecessary. As we contemplate this temporal interpretation of Elmore's reality, every moment of apparent progress or development takes on the quality of elaborate theatre designed not to entertain external observers, but to maintain the psychological stability of prisoners who must continue to believe in the theatre designed. Possibility of growth and change even when such belief serves, primarily to ensure their continued cooperation with their own imprisonment. In the quiet spaces between friendship and fabrication, where love transcends the boundaries of species and reality, There lurks a truth so profoundly unsettling that it transforms the most cherished relationship in all of Elmore into something far more complex and psychologically disturbing than the simple story of evolution and adoption that has been accepted without question by both the family and the Quast community that surrounds them. The Darwin deception theory suggests that the cheerful tale of a goldfish who evolved into a walking, talking family member represents not a miracle of biological transformation, but a desperate psychological construct designed to help Gumball cope with guilt, loss, and trauma so devastating that his mind has created an elaborate fantasy to avoid confronting the unbearable truth of what really happened to his beloved pet. This interpretation reveals Darwin not as a genuine individual with his own consciousness, desires, and agency, but as a sophisticated psychological projection, a manifestation of Gumball's desperate need to believe that love can transcend death, that loyalty can overcome biological limitations, and that the innocent trust of childhood companions can be preserved, even when the harsh realities of life and mortality threaten to destroy everything that makes existence bearable and meaningful. The impossibility of Darwin's supposed evolution becomes the first and most obvious indicator that something far more troubling underlies his presence in the Watterson household. The biological mechanisms that would be required for a goldfish to develop lungs capable of breathing air, legs capable of supporting terrestrial locomotion, a vocal apparatus capable of speech, and a brain capable of complex reasoning and emotional response simply do not exist within the known parameters of evolutionary biology, even when accelerated by the most generous interpretations of adaptive pressure and environmental change. The time frame for such dramatic biological transformation makes the story even more implausible, as evolutionary changes of this magnitude would require millions of years of gradual development across countless generations, rather than the instantaneous transformation that Darwin's story suggests. The idea that a single individual could spontaneously develop entirely new organ systems, cognitive capabilities, and physiological structures within the span of a childhood represents not evolution but pure fantasy, born from psychological necessity rather than biological reality. Yet, the family's unquestioning acceptance of this impossible transformation reveals the depth of their collective need to believe in the story that Darwin's presence allows them to tell about themselves and their capacity for love, acceptance, and miraculous redemption. Their willingness to embrace such an obviously fabricated explanation suggests that the truth they are avoiding must be so painful that even the most implausible alternative becomes preferable to direct confrontation with what actually occurred. Gumball's role as the primary architect of the Darwin fantasy becomes clear when we examine the specific psychological functions that Darwin's presence serves within the family dynamic. Darwin represents everything that Gumball's damaged psyche believes a perfect companion should be: unconditionally loyal, morally pure, emotionally supportive, and completely devoted to Gumball's well-being, without any competing interests or personal agenda that might threaten their relationship. The perfection of Darwin's devotion becomes particularly suspicious when compared to the complex, conflicted nature of every other relationship in Gumball's life. Real relationships include moments of tension, disagreement, jealousy, and competing priorities that create natural friction and require ongoing negotiation and compromise. Darwin's complete absence of such complications marks him as fundamentally different from any authentic individual, his personality carefully constructed to provide exactly the kind of unwavering support that a traumatized psyche would desperately crave. Darwin's moral clarity and ethical consistency serve additional psychological functions, providing Gumball with an internal voice of conscience that can guide him toward better decisions while maintaining the illusion that this guidance comes from an external source rather than his own suppressed wisdom. The way Darwin consistently advocates for kindness, honesty, and consideration of others' feelings reflects not the natural personality development of an evolved goldfish, but the projected moral ideals of someone who recognizes right and wrong, but struggles to consistently choose the ethical path without external reinforcement. The specific trauma that necessitated Darwin's creation as a psychological defense mechanism becomes clearer when we consider the implications of pet ownership for children and the devastating impact that pet death can have on developing minds that have not yet learned to process loss, mortality, and the limits of their own power to protect those they love. The death of a beloved pet often represents a child's first meaningful encounter with mortality, forcing recognition that love cannot prevent death, and that even the most innocent and deserving beings are vulnerable to forces beyond anyone's control. For a sensitive child like Gumball, whose emotional intensity and vivid imagination make him particularly susceptible to psychological trauma, the death of a beloved goldfish could easily trigger a psychological crisis so severe that normal coping mechanisms would prove inadequate. The guilt associated with pet care, wondering if different feeding schedules, cleaner water, better equipment, or more careful attention might have prevented. The tragedy can become overwhelming for young minds that tend to assume responsibility for outcomes that are actually beyond their control. The specific choice of a goldfish as the basis for the Darwin fantasy carries additional psychological significance, as goldfish represent some of the most vulnerable and dependent pets that children typically care for. Their complete reliance on their human caretakers for survival, their inability to communicate distress or needs directly, and their relatively short lifespans compared to mammals make them particularly likely candidates for childhood experiences of helplessness and loss. The transformation of this guilt and grief into Darwin's evolution story represents a sophisticated psychological defense mechanism that allows Gumball to avoid confronting the finality of death while transforming feelings of failure and loss into a narrative of miraculous success and enhanced relationship. Rather than accepting that his beloved pet died due to circumstances beyond his control, Gumball's mind creates a fantasy where love literally transcends biological limitations and transforms the goldfish into an even better companion than he could have been in his original form. Darwin's fish origins continue to influence his constructed personality in ways that reveal the psychological mechanisms underlying his creation. His swimming motions when excited, his occasional references to his aquatic past, his comfort with water. All of these characteristics represent Gumball's attempt to maintain some connection to the original pet while justifying the dramatic transformation that allows the relationship to continue. The way Darwin sometimes displays behaviors that seem inconsistent with his supposed evolution moments where he appears more fish-like in his thinking or reactions might represent occasions when Gumball's psychological defenses weaken slightly and his consciousness briefly acknowledges the artificial nature of Darwin's human characteristics. These glimpses of the original goldfish's simpler nature break through the elaborate personality construction, revealing the more basic creature that serves as the foundation for the fantasy. The family's enthusiastic acceptance of Darwin as a full family member serves their own psychological needs as well, allowing them to participate in a narrative of unconditional love and acceptance that helps them feel better about their own capacity for family loyalty and emotional generosity. Their willingness to embrace Darwin without question provides them with evidence of their own goodness and open-heartedness, qualities they may doubt when confronting their actual family dynamics and relationship patterns. Nicole's maternal protectiveness toward Darwin becomes particularly significant when interpreted as her participation in Gumball's psychological defense mechanism, rather than genuine maternal instinct toward an adopted child. Her fierce advocacy for Darwin's rights and status within the family serves to reinforce the fiction that he is a real individual deserving of protection, rather than a psychological construct that exists primarily to meet Gumball's emotional needs. Richard's casual acceptance of Darwin's presence reflects his general pattern of avoiding difficult questions or uncomfortable truths, his willingness to go along with family fictions, rather than confronting realities that might require emotional work or psychological insight. His relationship with Darwin allows him to experience the satisfaction of being a good father, without having to address the more complex challenges that arise in relationships with children who have genuine psychological needs. And independent perspectives. Anais' intellectual acceptance of Darwin's impossible evolution reveals the way her advanced cognitive abilities can be co-opted to provide rational-sounding explanations for irrational psychological phenomena. Her scientific discussions of Darwin's transformation serve to legitimize the fantasy through academic language and theoretical frameworks, providing intellectual cover for what is essentially an emotional defense mechanism. The broader community's acceptance of Darwin without question reveals either their participation in collective denial or the possibility that Darwin's presence is not visible to others in the same way it appears to the Watterson family. If other residents can see and interact with Darwin, their casual acceptance of his impossible nature suggests that the entire community operates according to psychological rather than biological principles. If they cannot actually perceive him as Gumball does, their apparent interactions might represent Gumball's projection of social acceptance onto situations that are actually quite different from his perception. The school system's treatment of Darwin as a legitimate student becomes particularly problematic when viewed through this lens, as educational institutions would normally require documentation, medical records, and legal guardianship papers that would be impossible to provide for a goldfish who supposedly evolved into human form. The apparent ease with which Darwin integrated into the academic environment suggests either institutional participation in the fantasy or the possibility that his school experiences exist primarily within Gumball's imagination. Darwin's academic performance and social relationships at school reflect the way Gumball's mind constructs scenarios where his idealized companion succeeds in areas where Gumball himself struggles. Darwin's moral authority among his peers, his ability to mediate conflicts and provide wise counsel, his general popularity and acceptance, all of these characteristics represent wish fulfillment rather than realistic personality development. The episodes where Darwin appears to act independently or demonstrate agency separate from Gumball's direct influence become particularly significant when analyzed for evidence of genuine individual consciousness versus sophisticated psychological projection. True independence would involve Darwin making decisions that conflict with Gumball's interests or desires, developing relationships that compete with their primary bond, or pursuing goals that require him to prioritize his own needs over Gumball's welfare. Yet examination of Darwin's apparent independent actions reveals that they consistently serve to strengthen rather than threaten his relationship with Gumball, providing temporary drama and conflict that ultimately results in renewed appreciation for their bond rather than genuine challenge to their psychological symbiosis. Darwin's rebellious phases and moments of apparent self-assertion function more like therapeutic exercises designed to reinforce the fantasy of his individuality rather than evidence of authentic personal development. The way Darwin handles moral dilemmas and ethical challenges reflects not the natural moral development that would occur in a real individual, but the projection of Gumball's own suppressed ethical knowledge onto an external figure who can advocate for right action without threatening. Gumball's self-image as someone who naturally wants to make good choices. Darwin becomes the voice of conscience that allows Gumball to access his own moral wisdom while maintaining the psychological distance necessary to avoid feeling judged or criticized by internal self-evaluation. The romantic relationships and friendships that Darwin develops throughout the series serve to provide Gumball with vicarious experiences of social success and emotional connection, while protecting him from the vulnerability and potential rejection that real relationships would entail. Darwin's romantic interests and social bonds exist primarily to enhance the fantasy of his independent existence, rather than representing genuine emotional development or authentic interpersonal connection. The way other characters respond to Darwin reveals additional layers of the deception, as their interactions might represent either genuine relationships with a real individual or Gumball's projection of social acceptance and friendship onto situations where others are actually responding to Gumball himself or to no one at all. The apparent depth and consistency of these relationships could indicate either remarkable psychological construction or evidence that Darwin's existence extends beyond Gumball's individual psychology. The episodes where Darwin's fish nature becomes more prominent, or where he temporarily returns to aquatic behavior, might represent moments when the psychological defense mechanism weakens and the underlying trauma begins to surface. These episodes often involve themes of identity, belonging, and the question of whether Darwin truly belongs in the terrestrial world he has adopted, reflecting deeper questions about whether the fantasy can be maintained indefinitely or whether psychological integration requires eventually confronting the truth about loss and mortality. The possibility that Darwin represents not just psychological fantasy but active psychological splitting, a defense mechanism where traumatic experiences are managed by creating alternate personality aspects that can contain and process unbearable emotions, adds additional complexity to the interpretation. In this framework, Darwin might represent the parts of Gumball's personality that remain optimistic, trusting, and capable of love, despite trauma, while Gumball himself contains the more damaged aspects that struggle with cynicism, anxiety, and emotional regulation. This psychological splitting would explain Darwin's moral consistency and emotional stability, in contrast to Gumball's more volatile and conflicted nature, as the trauma and negative emotions are contained within Gumball, while the positive qualities are projected onto Darwin. The relationship between them becomes a form of internal dialogue between different aspects of a single consciousness, rather than genuine interaction between two separate individuals. The ultimate tragedy of the Darwin deception lies not in the psychological mechanism itself, which serves important protective functions for a traumatized psyche, but in the way it prevents genuine processing and integration of the loss that necessitated its creation. As long as the fantasy of Darwin's continued existence can be maintained, Gumball never has to fully confront the grief, guilt, and helplessness associated with his pet's death, preventing the natural mourning process that would eventually allow healing and acceptance. The fantasy also prevents Gumball from developing authentic relationships with real individuals who could provide genuine companionship and support, as no actual person can compete with the perfect, unconditional devotion that Darwin represents. The psychological energy invested in maintaining the Darwin construction becomes unavailable for forming connections with people who exist independently and have their own needs, desires, and limitations. Yet, perhaps the most profound aspect of the Darwin deception is the way it demonstrates the extraordinary power of love and the lengths to which the human psyche will go to preserve connection with those we cherish. Even if Darwin exists only as psychological fantasy, the love that created and sustains him remains genuine, and his positive influence on Gumball's behavior and moral development produces real benefits regardless of the artificial nature of his existence. As we contemplate this darker interpretation of one of Elmore's most beloved relationships, we are reminded that the boundary between reality and fantasy becomes less important than the psychological functions that our constructions serve, and that sometimes the most profound truths about human nature can be found not in what is literally real, but in what we need to believe in order to survive and continue growing, despite experiences that threaten to overwhelm our capacity for hope and connection. Behind the cheerful facade of academic achievement and youthful development that characterizes Elmore Junior High School lies an institutional structure so fundamentally designed around control, surveillance, and behavioral modification that it transforms what should be a nurturing environment for learning and growth into something that more closely resembles a juvenile detention facility operated according to principles of psychological manipulation and social engineering rather than genuine educational philosophy. The school as prison system theory reveals how every aspect of the educational experience in Elmore serves not to develop young minds or prepare students for successful adult lives, but to condition them for a lifetime of compliance with authority structures that prioritize institutional control over individual development and creative thinking. This interpretation exposes the true function of Elmore Junior High as a sophisticated behavioral laboratory where developing personalities are systematically shaped through carefully designed reward and punishment systems that have little connection to actual learning outcomes or intellectual development. The school operates according to the logic of incarceration rather than education, with students treated not as individuals with unique potentials and learning needs, but as subjects whose behavior must be monitored, controlled, and modified according to parameters established by administrators who view deviation from institutional norms as threats to be eliminated rather than diversity to be celebrated and nurtured. The physical architecture of the school building itself reveals the prison-like nature of its true function, with long corridors that seem designed more for surveillance and control than for efficient movement between learning environments. The hallways stretch endlessly in configurations that make navigation deliberately confusing and disorienting, ensuring that students cannot easily find alternative routes or private spaces where they might gather without supervision. The classroom doors that lock from the outside, the windows positioned too high for students to see beyond the school grounds, the way certain areas remain mysteriously off-limits, without explanation. All of these architectural features serve to create an environment where movement is restricted and observation is constant. The surveillance systems embedded throughout the building operate with a sophistication that far exceeds what would be necessary for normal school security, suggesting that monitoring student behavior serves purposes that extend beyond simple safety concerns. The cameras positioned at every intersection, the recording devices hidden in what should be private spaces, the way student conversations and activities seem to be documented and analyzed by administrative staff. All of these elements point to a level of observation and data collection that transforms the school experience into a form of behavioral research conducted on unwilling subjects who have no understanding of how their actions and responses are being catalogued and studied. Principal Brown's role within this system becomes clear when we examine his behavior not as educational leadership, but as the management of a controlled population whose compliance must be maintained through carefully calibrated combinations of reward, punishment, and psychological manipulation. His apparent incompetence and emotional instability serve specific institutional functions, creating an environment where students cannot predict or rely upon consistent authority while ensuring that they remain focused on navigating administrative unpredictability, rather than questioning the fundamental assumptions that underlie their confinement. The way Principal Brown's personal life and emotional struggles become entangled with school operations serves to distract both students and parents from examining the more systematic problems with the educational philosophy, institutional practices that define their daily experience. His romantic relationship with Miss Simeon, his financial difficulties, his frequent emotional breakdowns, all of these personal dramas create the impression that institutional problems stem from individual incompetence rather than deliberate policy decisions designed to prioritize control over learning. Miss Simeon's teaching methods reveal themselves as sophisticated behavioral modification techniques disguised as pedagogical approaches when examined through the lens of institutional control rather than educational effectiveness. Her arbitrary grading systems, her obvious favoritism towards certain students, her use of humiliation and public shame as classroom management tools, all of these practices serve to condition students to accept unfair treatment as normal, while teaching them that academic success depends more on compliance with authority than on genuine intellectual achievement or creative thinking. The way Miss Simeon singles out particular students for harassment and persecution demonstrates how the prison system identifies and targets individuals who show signs of independence, creativity, or resistance to institutional control. Her particular focus on Gumball as a subject for punishment and surveillance reveals how the system responds to students whose personalities or learning styles do not conform to institutional expectations, treating such diversity not as valuable variation to be accommodated, but as deviance to be corrected through increasingly severe interventions. The curriculum offered at Elmore Junior High reveals additional evidence of the institution's true priorities when examined for its actual educational content versus its function as a behavior modification program. The subjects taught seem designed more to occupy time and create opportunities for compliance training than to provide students with knowledge or skills that would prepare them for independent thinking or successful adult lives. The emphasis on memorization over critical thinking, on following directions over creative problem solving, on standardized responses over individual expression, all of these pedagogical choices serve to condition students for lives of institutional dependence rather than intellectual independence. The way academic achievement is measured and rewarded within the school system prioritizes conformity and rule following over genuine learning or intellectual development, with grades serving more as behavior modification tools than as meaningful assessments of student knowledge or capability. Students who demonstrate creativity, ask challenging questions, or approach problems from unconventional angles often find themselves penalized rather than encouraged, teaching them that success within institutional structures requires suppression of individual thinking in favor of predetermined acceptable responses. The disciplinary systems employed throughout the school operate according to principles borrowed from correctional institutions rather than educational philosophy, with punishments designed more to demonstrate institutional power than to help students learn from mistakes or develop better decision-making capabilities. The detention systems, the suspension policies, the way minor infractions can escalate into serious consequences, all of these elements serve to condition students to fear authority rather than respect it, creating compliance through intimidation rather than cooperation through understanding. The guidance counseling services offered within the school reveal themselves as additional mechanisms of behavioral control rather than genuine support for student development when examined for their actual impact on student well-being. versus their function within the larger institutional framework. The counselors serve more as intelligence-gathering agents than as advocates for student needs. Their sessions designed to identify potential sources of resistance or non-compliance, rather than to provide meaningful emotional support or academic guidance. The way student records are maintained and shared within the school system suggests that documentation serves surveillance purposes rather than educational planning, with detailed behavioral profiles being compiled on each student that focus more on compliance indicators than on learning needs or academic potential. These records follow students throughout their educational experience, creating permanent documentation of perceived behavioral problems that can influence how they are treated by future teachers and administrators, regardless of their actual development or change over time. The extracurricular activities and social programs offered by the school function as additional opportunities for behavioral observation and social control, rather than genuine enrichment experiences designed to develop student interests and talents. The clubs and organizations operate according to strict hierarchies that mirror the larger institutional power structures, teaching students to accept their assigned roles within social systems rather than encouraging them to develop leadership capabilities or pursue authentic interests. The way student elections and democratic participation are structured within the school environment serves to provide the illusion of student voice and choice, while ensuring that actual decision-making power remains concentrated within the administrative hierarchy. Students are allowed to vote on trivial matters while being systematically excluded from meaningful participation in policies that affect their daily educational experience, teaching them that democratic participation is primarily symbolic rather than substantive. The relationship between the school and parents reveals additional layers of institutional control, as family involvement is carefully managed to maintain administrative authority while providing the appearance of community engagement and parental input. Parent-teacher conferences serve more as opportunities to reinforce institutional narratives about student behavior than as genuine collaborations focused on supporting individual student development and addressing specific learning needs. The way parents are excluded from meaningful participation in curriculum decisions, disciplinary policies, or educational philosophy discussions ensures that institutional priorities take precedence over family values or individual student needs. Parents who attempt to advocate for their children or challenge institutional practices often find themselves labeled as problems to be managed rather than partners in the educational process. The teacher training and administrative development programs that shape staff behavior within the school system prioritize institutional loyalty and compliance enforcement over educational expertise or student advocacy, ensuring that even well-intentioned educators become agents of the control system rather than genuine advocates for learning and development. Teachers are rewarded for maintaining classroom order and administrative compliance rather than for innovative teaching methods or success in promoting genuine learning outcomes. The way new teachers are socialized into the institutional culture ensures that questioning existing policies or advocating for alternative approaches becomes psychologically difficult and professionally dangerous, creating a staff environment where maintaining the status quo takes precedence over educational innovation or student-centered practice. The physical conditions and resource allocation within the school reveal how institutional priorities are reflected in material choices that affect daily educational experience. The lack of adequate learning materials, the deteriorating physical infrastructure, the way certain programs receive generous funding, while others are systematically underfunded. All of these resource decisions serve to reinforce the message that student learning and well-being are secondary to administrative control and institutional maintenance. The way student health and safety concerns are addressed within the school system demonstrates how institutional liability management takes precedence over genuine care for student well-being, with policies designed more to protect the institution from legal consequences than to create environments where students can thrive physically and emotionally. The graduation and advancement systems employed by the school reveal perhaps the most disturbing aspect of its prison-like function, as students seem to remain within the institutional structure indefinitely without clear pathways to genuine educational completion or transition to independent adult lives. The way grade levels and academic progress appear to be suspended or manipulated suggests that the institution is designed to maintain its population rather than prepare students for successful transition to higher education or productive careers. The absence of meaningful post-secondary preparation or career guidance services reveals how the school functions more to maintain institutional enrollment than to prepare students for independent success outside the controlled educational environment. Students graduate without clear skills, knowledge, or confidence necessary for adult independence, ensuring their continued dependence on institutional structures and authority systems. The relationship between Elmore Junior High and the broader community reveals how educational institutions can serve social control functions that extend beyond their immediate student populations, conditioning entire communities to accept authoritarian approaches to human development while providing the illusion of educational progress and social advancement. The way community members who question educational policies or advocate for alternative approaches are marginalized or excluded from meaningful participation in educational decision-making ensures that institutional priorities remain protected from community accountability or democratic oversight. The long-term psychological effects of exposure to this educational prison system become apparent when examining how former students adapt to adult life and social relationships outside the institutional environment. The conditioning toward compliance, the suppression of critical thinking capabilities, the learned helplessness in the face of authority. All of these characteristics persist beyond the school years and influence how individuals participate in democratic institutions and social relationships throughout their adult lives. The way former students struggle with independent decision-making, creative problem-solving, and authentic self-expression reveals the lasting damage caused by educational systems that prioritize control over development and compliance over genuine learning. The institution succeeds in producing graduates who are psychologically prepared for lives of institutional dependence, but lack the intellectual confidence and emotional resilience necessary for genuine autonomy and social contribution. The ultimate tragedy of the school as prison system lies not in any single incident of abuse or neglect, but in the systematic way it transforms what should be humanity's most hopeful institution, the place where young minds are, nurtured and prepared for productive, creative adult lives into a mechanism for crushing curiosity, suppressing individuality, and conditioning compliance with authority structures that serve institutional needs rather than human development. As we contemplate this interpretation of Elmore Junior High, every moment of apparent learning or growth takes on the quality of elaborate theater designed not to genuinely educate, but to maintain the illusion of educational progress while systematically undermining the very qualities of mind, character that would enable students to question, resist, or transcend the institutional structures that seek to contain and control them throughout their lives. In the seemingly innocent landscape of suburban tranquility that defines the neighborhood surrounding the Watterson family home, there exists a network of observation and control so sophisticated and pervasive that it transforms every casual interaction every friendly conversation, and every moment of apparent community support into something far more sinister and coordinated than the simple social fabric of a typical residential area. The neighborhood watch theory reveals how the supporting cast of Elmore functions not as authentic community members pursuing their own independent lives and interests, but as a carefully orchestrated surveillance system designed to monitor, influence, and when necessary, control the behavior of the primary subjects who remain unaware that their every action is being documented and analyzed by individuals whose apparent normalcy masks their true function as agents of observation and behavioral modification. This interpretation transforms every neighbor, every service worker, every casual acquaintance who appears in the Watterson family's daily experience into a potential operative whose presence serves purposes that extend far beyond the simple social interactions they appear to represent. The apparent randomness of neighborhood encounters reveals itself as carefully choreographed theater when examined for patterns of timing, frequency, and the specific types of information that seem to circulate through community networks with supernatural speed and accuracy. Mrs. Robinson emerges as perhaps the most obvious example of how neighborhood surveillance operates under the guise of typical suburban nosiness and community concern. Her obsessive monitoring of the Watterson family's activities, her detailed knowledge of their daily routines and personal problems, her apparent ability to observe events that should be private or hidden. All of these characteristics suggest someone whose interest in her neighbors extends far beyond normal curiosity and crosses into the realm of professional intelligence gathering. The way Mrs. Robinson positions herself to observe family interactions, her strategic placement during moments of crisis or drama, her uncanny ability to appear whenever significant events occur. These patterns suggest not coincidence, but deliberate positioning by someone whose primary function involves maintaining continuous surveillance of the target family. Her complaints about noise, property maintenance, and behavioral disruptions serve dual purposes, providing plausible cover for her constant attention while creating opportunities to gather detailed information about family dynamics and individual psychological states. Mrs. Robinson's relationship with her husband Gaylord reveals additional layers of the surveillance operation, as his apparent incompetence and social awkwardness provide perfect cover for intelligence gathering activities that might otherwise seem suspicious if conducted by more obviously capable individuals. Their marriage functions as a surveillance partnership disguised as typical suburban dysfunction, with each spouse playing specific roles that maximize their access to information while maintaining the illusion of being harmless, if annoying, neighbors. The way neighborhood gossip networks operate in Elmore reveals the sophisticated nature of the information gathering system that surrounds the Watterson family, with rumors, private details, and supposedly confidential information spreading through the community with speed and accuracy that suggests coordinated communication rather than casual social interaction. The apparent randomness of who knows what information, when actually follows patterns that indicate systematic distribution of intelligence through networks designed to ensure that relevant information reaches appropriate handlers while maintaining the illusion of organic social communication. Larry's omnipresence across virtually every service job in Elmore represents perhaps the most obvious example of how the surveillance system maintains constant contact with its primary targets through seemingly normal commercial and professional interactions. His ability to appear in whatever role the situation requires — grocery clerk, bank teller, delivery driver, restaurant server, maintenance worker — ensures that the Watterson family cannot engage with any aspect of their community life without their activities being observed and documented by the same individual operating under multiple cover identities. The psychological profile that Larry presents during these various professional encounters reveals sophisticated training in behavioral observation and social manipulation, as he consistently demonstrates the ability to extract information, influence decisions, and guide interactions in ways that serve surveillance purposes while maintaining his cover as an ordinary service worker. His apparent incompetence and frequent job changes provide perfect explanations for his constant presence and rotating assignments, while ensuring that his subjects never become too familiar with his true capabilities or objectives. The way Larry interacts with other community members suggests that his surveillance role extends beyond the Watterson family to encompass broader intelligence-gathering operations that monitor community dynamics, social relationships, and potential sources of resistance or disruption to whatever larger agenda his activities serve. His casual conversations with neighbors, his participation in community events, his apparent integration into local social networks. All of these activities provide opportunities to gather intelligence while reinforcing his cover identity as a struggling but hard-working member of the community. The postal and delivery services that serve the neighborhood reveal additional layers of the surveillance operation, as these essential services provide perfect cover for regular, systematic access to every residence while offering opportunities to monitor communication patterns, purchasing behaviors, and lifestyle indicators that reveal detailed information about family finances, relationships, and personal interests. The mail carriers and package delivery personnel who serve Elmore demonstrate knowledge and awareness of family situations that extends far beyond what would be normal for professional service providers. The way deliveries are timed to coincide with moments of family crisis or significant events suggests coordination with other elements of the surveillance network, ensuring that opportunities for observation and intelligence gathering are maximized during periods when subjects are most likely to reveal important information about their psychological states, relationship dynamics, or future plans. The various repair and maintenance workers who appear whenever the Watterson family experiences household problems or infrastructure failures represent additional surveillance opportunities disguised as necessary services. Their access to private spaces within the home, providing chances to install monitoring equipment, observe family interactions, and gather intelligence about daily routines and domestic arrangements that would otherwise remain hidden from external observation. The apparent incompetence of many of these service providers serves important functions within the surveillance framework, as their need for multiple visits and extended time in the home creates opportunities for thorough intelligence gathering, while their obvious limitations provide explanations for why their work takes longer and requires more access than would normally be expected from professional contractors. The emergency services and public safety personnel who respond to the frequent crises and unusual events that characterize life in the Watterson household demonstrate response times and knowledge of family situations that suggest ongoing monitoring rather than reactive emergency response. The paramedics, firefighters, and police officers who appear during various emergencies consistently demonstrate familiarity with family members, awareness of ongoing situations, and access to information that would not normally be available to emergency responders arriving at isolated incidents. The way these emergency responders interact with the family members reveals training in psychological assessment and behavioral analysis that extends beyond what would be expected from typical first responders. Their questions and observations, designed to gather intelligence about mental states, relationship dynamics, and potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited for future surveillance or control operations. The healthcare providers who serve the Watterson family operate within the surveillance network by providing services that create opportunities for intimate observation of physical and psychological conditions while maintaining detailed records that contribute to the comprehensive intelligence. Profiles being compiled on each family member. The doctors, nurses, and specialists who treat various family ailments demonstrate knowledge of family history and personal information that suggests coordination with other elements of the surveillance system. The way medical appointments and health crises are managed within the community reveals how healthcare services can be coordinated to serve surveillance purposes while providing legitimate medical care, with scheduling, referrals, and treatment decisions influenced by intelligence-gathering objectives, as well as health considerations. The educational and childcare personnel who interact with the children in the family function as crucial elements of the surveillance network, their professional access to young minds providing opportunities to gather intelligence about family dynamics while potentially influencing child development in ways that serve larger control objectives. The teachers, coaches, and activity leaders who work with Gumball and Anais demonstrate awareness of family situations and access to personal information that extends beyond what would normally be available through educational channels. The way school communications and educational decisions are coordinated with other elements of the community. Surveillance network suggests that academic institutions serve intelligence-gathering functions while maintaining their basic primary educational mission, with student records, behavioral assessments, and family interactions all contributing to the comprehensive surveillance profiles being maintained on each family member. The commercial establishments and retail personnel who serve the neighborhood function as additional surveillance nodes within the larger intelligence-gathering network. Their interactions with family members during shopping trips and commercial transactions providing opportunities to monitor purchasing patterns, financial resources, and consumer preferences that reveal detailed information about lifestyle, values, and economic circumstances. The way store clerks, managers, and sales personnel interact with the Watterson family reveals training in customer behavior analysis that extends beyond normal commercial interest. Their observations and conversations, designed to extract information while influencing purchasing decisions in ways that serve surveillance objectives rather than purely commercial goals. The religious and community organization leaders who serve Elmore's residents provide additional opportunities for intelligence gathering through their access to personal information shared during counseling sessions, community meetings, and social events. The pastors, group leaders, and volunteer coordinators who organize community activities demonstrate knowledge of family situations and personal struggles that suggests coordination with other surveillance elements rather than confidential, pastoral, or counseling. Relationships. The way community events and social gatherings are organized and managed reveals how these apparently innocent activities can serve surveillance purposes by creating opportunities for observation, intelligence gathering, and behavioral assessment, while maintaining the appearance of normal community engagement and social support. The maintenance and infrastructure personnel who keep the neighborhood functioning, the utility workers, landscapers, street cleaners, and municipal employees represent another layer of the surveillance network whose essential services provide regular access to residential areas while offering opportunities to monitor activity patterns, observe property conditions, and gather intelligence about neighborhood dynamics and individual family behaviors. The way infrastructure problems and maintenance needs are prioritized and addressed within the community suggests coordination that serves surveillance objectives as well as practical maintenance requirements with service calls and repair schedules designed to maximize intelligence gathering opportunities while maintaining essential community services. The social services and government personnel who interact with the family during various bureaucratic processes and official business represent direct connections between the surveillance network and formal authority structures. Their access to official records and legal documents, providing comprehensive intelligence about family finances, legal status, and official relationships that complement the behavioral observation conducted by other network elements. The way official processes and government interactions are managed reveals how bureaucratic systems can be coordinated to serve surveillance purposes while maintaining their official functions, with paperwork, appointments, and official communications all contributing to the comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation that monitors every aspect of family life. The transportation services and infrastructure that serve the neighborhood provide additional surveillance capabilities through their ability to monitor movement patterns, travel destinations, and mobility choices that reveal information about family relationships, work situations, and social connections beyond the immediate neighborhood. The bus drivers, taxi operators, and transportation personnel who serve Elmore demonstrate awareness of family travel patterns and social connections that suggests coordination with broader surveillance objectives. The way transportation schedules and service availability are managed within the community reveals how mobility can be influenced and controlled while maintaining the appearance of normal public services, with transportation options designed to channel movement in ways that serve surveillance and control objectives rather than purely practical transportation needs. The media and communication personnel who serve the community, the cable installers, phone technicians, internet service providers, and electronic communication specialists represent perhaps the most intrusive elements of the surveillance network through their access to private communications, entertainment choices, and digital behaviors that reveal intimate details about personal relationships, private thoughts, and individual psychological profiles. The way communication services are provided and maintained within the community suggests that these essential modern services serve dual functions, providing legitimate connectivity while enabling comprehensive monitoring of digital communications and electronic behaviors that would otherwise remain private and unobserved. The ultimate coordination of this neighborhood surveillance network reveals itself through the way information gathered by various operatives seems to be compiled, analyzed, and used to influence family decisions and community interactions in ways that serve larger objectives beyond simple intelligence gathering. The behavioral modifications, the social pressures, the apparently coincidental events that guide family choices. All of these influences suggest that the surveillance network functions not merely as passive observation, but as active behavior modification system designed to control and direct family development according to predetermined parameters. The psychological impact of living under such comprehensive surveillance becomes apparent when examining how family members adapt their behavior, modify their expressions, and limit their authentic interactions in ways that suggest unconscious awareness of being constantly observed and evaluated. The self-censorship, the performative aspects of family interactions, the way private moments seem to be influenced by awareness of potential observation. All of these adaptations reveal how pervasive surveillance systems can modify behavior, even when subjects remain consciously unaware of the true extent of monitoring they experience. As we contemplate this interpretation of Elmore's community structure, every moment of apparent neighborly concern or community support takes on the quality of professional intelligence operation disguised as social interaction, transforming what should be the supportive fabric of residential community life into a sophisticated control mechanism that monitors, influences, and ultimately manages every aspect of family existence while maintaining the comfortable illusion of normal suburban neighborhood life.